All right, guys, this is the NASCAR RotoViz live show for Pocono. Obviously, we had a crazy qualifying situation there with it being an impound race. A lot of cars failing post-qualifying technical inspection, so 13 cars failed. You can see them all here. It's from Kyle Busch all the way down to Casey Kane down here in the bottom left of the screen. So Kyle Busch starting 28th, Casey Kane 40th. Those 13 drivers all failed post-qualifying technical inspection, so their qualifying time was disallowed, and they will be starting from these positions not only in the race but also for DraftKings purposes. So yes, this is their DraftKings starting position right there. You can see the guys starting up front. Daniel Suarez on pole. Denny Hamlin starts second. And you got a 1, 2, 3 JGR start there with Eric Jones in third as well. So yeah, it makes it a very interesting week, and I'm just going to kind of give some strategy here on the way I think I'm going to attack this slate. I am playing this weekend, so it's going to be a lot of fun. But first, just wanted to say that Pocono, the model is pretty simple. The combined practice times from the different sessions go into the model. Then there is year-to-date driver rating, and then there is some track performance. You can either take Pocono performance or you can take Pocono and Indy performance. Those two together go into the model. So it's like the large flat tracks there showed up as significant in the model this weekend. Model R squared is right around 0.6. So about 60% of the variance in finishing position. That puts it kind of average in predictability. I did remove the rain shortened race from the model, so we're not talking about the race that Chris Buescher won, which really threw off a lot of things. This is no weather in the forecast this weekend, so that's good. However, I think Model R squared 0.6 pretty good, but not one of the highest there. So we can get away from the model a little bit this weekend, and I think we're going to want to do that with ownership percentages for all these drivers starting way in the back. So we'll talk about that. The incident rate at Pocono is right around 19-20%. So with 40 cars in the field, we can expect about 8 cars on average to have major incidents. So there is plenty of place differential potential for these back markers, plus some of the some incidents here. So we definitely want to be leveraging ownership percentages this weekend. I think this is a great weekend for little to no dominators. I think Denny Hamlin, that 20% owned number may be a little low. He maybe goes around 25% owned, but it's tough to say because all of these guys down here at the back, we're going to expect them to be pretty chalky as well. So I think 20 is probably a fair estimate for Denny Hamlin. He's the top dominator candidate, but as you can see here in the sim scores, he only projects for an upside, so 15% of the time or better of like 10% of the laps led, which is only 16 laps led. That's only 4 DraftKings points. So 15% of the time you'll do better than that, and certainly I think this is a situation where the sim scores don't really tell the full story because it doesn't know that all the other really good drivers qualified in the back. It's just looking at Denny Hamlin and comparing the past drivers that have started near his position. But usually in the past, drivers that have started near his position have had a lot of other very good drivers to contend with, which is why these drivers haven't led a ton of laps in the comparables here. So like you can see, maybe Casey Kane in 2011, Brad Keselowski. There's a couple, here where Joey Logano led 18% of the laps at Pocono in 2014. Keselowski 59% in 2014. One of the other 2014 races there. So there's definitely potential for Denny Hamlin to dominate, and I do think of the dominator candidates, he's the most likely, but I really think what we're going to see is some strategy from these guys back here, which will really shake up the dominators. You might see any of these probably top 7 or so drivers that are starting back here, so Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, Logano, Bowyer, Larson, Blaney, and Almirola. If any of these fast drivers get on the right strategy, whoever's the fastest among them on the correct strategy will probably end up picking up some dominator points as well, out front leading some laps, things like that. And of course, Kevin Harvick probably has the fastest car this weekend. Model projection about 50% owned. Kyle Busch only projects about a third owned, about 1 out of every 3 lineups. And I think that's partly due to the price tag here, $11,800, and he doesn't have quite as good a car as Harvick. He starts further forward, so I think Kyle Busch, that ownership percentage projection makes sense. What I think will end up happening is Harvick will go more like 55-60% owned, and Kyle Busch will go more like 40-45% owned, something like that. So that's kind of what I'm guessing with these drivers. But starting up here at the front, dominators, I think Denny Hamlin's the most likely dominator. Certainly it's possible JGR starting 1, 2, 3, coordinate, and Daniel Suarez gets the early jump. and leads the early laps. One thing that is a little interesting is Brad Keselowski starting in 4th. That outside line can definitely take off at times at Pocono, and so if somehow the restart goes and they battle it out, Brad Keselowski could easily be leading this race at the beginning as well. So there's some Dominator potential for Keselowski. Let's go check out Brad Keselowski's Dominator stats here. 6.3 upside, laps led. If we go to look at Daniel Suarez, 9.7% upside for laps led. So I really do think these 3 are the top 3 Dominator candidates from the start of the race. Now, what's going to happen is at Pocono, of course, we get very interesting pit strategies, and you'll see some teams short pit. You'll see some teams, split the first stage in half, and you'll see some teams, kind of pit, like run it all the way to the end of the fuel tank. And so we'll get a mix of strategies. So we will see some Dominators get mixed up. And, what could happen is Suarez leads the first 10 laps and Hamlin passes him, and then pits, maybe Toyota decide to pit early or something like that and give up the lead, and some of these guys back here stay out. So I really do think we're going to see a shakeup of Dominators this weekend. So I think you could definitely go 0 Dominator lineups this weekend in NASCAR DFS. When I say 0 Dominators, I'm not talking like not counting Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick as Dominators, because obviously these guys have the potential to dominate. I'm saying these, just counting these guys as place differential plays, everybody back here. So when I'm saying Dominators, I'm saying like guys you're picking to dominate the race would probably be these front 4 drivers, maybe. Maybe you could throw in a Truex or something like that. But you're really looking at these front set of drivers. Let's see what Truex's Dominator upside is according to the sim scores as well. Actually, Truex is a very interesting contrarian Dominator, I guess. He has some pretty solid upside. If we look at the people that have led a lot of laps, though, you see a couple of those started on pole, but you can see there's some drivers started 6th, 10th, 5th, 4th, that have led about 20% of the laps at very similar races to Pocono, either Indy or other past Pocono races, including Truex himself, who started 4th earlier this year and led 20% of the laps almost. So there is some contrarian appeal to Martin Truex Jr. as well. And then after that, it's pretty slim pickings. I'm really probably not playing anybody in this range from like Ryan Newman all the way back to Timmy Hill. So I don't see much merit in playing, Newman, Bowman, Kenseth, Buescher, McDowell, Allmendinger, Dillon, even really maybe David Reagan, maybe a little bit of Ricky Stenhouse, but probably not. I actually think the ownership percentage here on David Reagan's kind of wonky, but 11%. What I think is going to happen is he'll just be really low owned, and these guys back here will be even higher owned, probably in the 30s. And then maybe, guys like Bubba Wallace, Menard, and Dillon in the 40s, or upper 30s, lower 40s. So I think that's kind of what's gonna happen here is you get Bubba and Casey Kane maybe around 30s, mid 30s, and you get these guys upper 30s, 40s range there, and that's where your ownership percentage is going to come from your cheaper drivers. It's just all these guys back here. So yeah, I'm really not playing anybody this whole weekend from like Newman all the way to, like I said, Timmy Hill. But pretty much playing none of these guys. I don't think I'll have any exposure to any of them. If I was forced to have exposure to any of them, it would probably be Ricky Stenhouse, maybe a bit of David Reagan, and then maybe somebody like, I don't even know. I don't know. Probably nobody. Maybe somehow, something like Matt Kenseth or Alex Bowman gets a top finish. So maybe you could play a little bit of Alex Bowman, but yeah, I mean, that's just hoping for a miracle kind of thing. What I think it will be is, you want maybe a couple of these guys starting inside the top 8 that have Dominator potential, that could get out in front and lead and have the chance to pull off a top 3-5 finish, something like that. So, I think that doesn't include Jamie McMurray. I'm going to have 0% Jamie McMurray. Total fade for me. He's horrible at Pocono. Absolutely horrible here. But all the rest, I think there is some merit to at least considering in lineups in the top 8. Outside of that, like I said, you might be able to sprinkle in a couple of these guys if you really wanted to be super contrarian, but I don't love that play. And then maybe somebody like a Stenhouse or a Reagan, but don't really love that either. outside of that, you're basically playing these guys back here, Kyle Busch, to Casey Kane. So let's talk about these drivers. Just looking at ownership percentages, I think one guy that is really standing out to me is Jimmy Johnson. So I'm going to be pretty heavy on Jimmy Johnson. He comes in low owned. If we look at his sim scores, for example, upside of 12, median of 19.5. I think that's probably a little low, just because a lot of it is taking into account starting position, and so it's comparing him to some lesser drivers like David Rudiman and Marcus Ambrose, Justin Allgaier. He's comparing him to some of these guys. It doesn't really make sense. So I would shift all of these projections up several places for a guy like Jimmy Johnson here. Just because I weighed starting position so heavily. Maybe I should have de-weighted it a little bit in the sim scores this weekend. But yeah, it's really tough. The sim scores aren't super reliable this weekend. I'd use more on the model. And if we look at the model here, we can see Jimmy Johnson, an average finish of 9. That's more what I expect. So if he's average finish of 9, Eric Almirola 9, Blaney 9-10, Kyle Larson 9, Clint Boyer right in that 8-9 range, Joey Logano in that 8-9 range. There's no reason, especially with Jimmy Johnson starting further back and being cheaper than guys like Larson, Boyer, Logano, Kyle Busch, etc. No reason for Jimmy Johnson to be the lowest owned, but right now he projects to be the lowest owned, so I'm probably going to hammer him up closer towards 40-50%, something like that for Jimmy Johnson. That would be my guess of what I would do, just because I'm playing this like a restrictor plate race. If you look at these guys down here, you can see Menard, Dillon, and Byron are all really close. I thought Dillon would maybe draw a little bit lower ownership percentage just because he's higher priced and has pretty much a similar range of projections as Menard and Byron. But it seems to be some industry buzz around him, which is why the model's given him the highest ownership percentage among these. So tough to say what we should do on ownership percentage with these guys. I think I like Paul Menard the most, and then maybe go heavier on him, and then still play plenty of Byron and Dillon. But I think I would have the most Paul Menard here of the trio. Looking at Bubba Wallace, Casey Kane, another two drivers right here of very similar projections, similar price points, similar ownership percentage projection. You're literally flipping a coin between these two if you're picking one or the other. I don't even necessarily think it's like something that I could answer, like, who do you think, Bubba or Casey Kane, one or the other? Honestly, it's flipping a coin. We could maybe use the sim scores to kind of try to piece them out, but I don't even think that's going to be a big help because the sim scores don't really work super well this weekend. You think 24, 30, 39 for Kane, but it's comparing him to a lot of really bad drivers, so I don't think the comparison's fair there. And 26, 30, 39. So, basically no separation in anything. But you look at these guys they're comparing to: David Gilliland, Josh Wise, Blaney, Dave Blaney, not Ryan Blaney, Michael Annett. What they really should be more compared to is maybe guys like your Ricky Stenhouses, your Allmendingers, that type of thing. So even the sim scores aren't super great this weekend just because of the way the starting positions ended up working out. So I can't really, you want to ask Blaney or Bubba, I have no idea. I would say Bubba just because he has better equipment, but then I'd say Kane because he has better track history. So it's a super duper coin flip right here between these two. I think Bubba will draw the higher ownership percentage, even though the model doesn't show it. But I'm not even confident on that. So who knows? Who really knows? So these drivers up here, we talked about Bubba, we talked about Casey Kane, we talked about Byron, Dillon, Menard. We talked about Jimmy Johnson. And then you're talking these drivers up here. What do we do with these guys? Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, Joey Logano, Clint Boyer, Kyle Larson, Ryan Blaney, Eric Almirola. My model right now projects Almirola as the lowest owned. I think he'll be higher owned than that. He starts the furthest back. He's the cheapest of this crew. He finished 7th here in the first Pocono race. So I think he's actually going to be much higher owned. I think Blaney will be pretty highly owned. Larson, I think Logano is going to probably be the lowest owned of this group, and the model does show that as well, and Logano is much more expensive. So if you want to leverage with Joey Logano, absolutely. I'm going to have at least 30% Joey Logano, I would think. 33%, something like that, of Joey Logano. One thing I really like doing is fading Kyle Busch. I think he's, like I said, he's going to be 40-45% owned, but he's super expensive. He probably needs to, if not win the race, get darn near close to it and get plenty of dominator points just to kind of, pay off his value. Right now, if he finishes where everything says it's average, we can calculate the value here for Kyle Busch, right? So we can say equals points per dollar, and let's multiply it by 1,000. Only 5.34, 5.35 value. That's not that great. We usually like to go for more than 5x value in GPPs, and he's right on the low end there. So I actually like fading Kyle Busch this weekend. I'm probably going to be underweight on Kyle Busch relative to the field. I will obviously have some exposure to him, but I think I'm going to be underweight. Kevin Harvick, I think I'll be underweight as well. I don't think I'm going to have 50% Kevin Harvick. I think I'm just going to, hope that the dominator points are super spread out, and again, that reduces the value for somebody like Kevin Harvick as well. Now, I don't think fading Harvick is what you should do. I was just going to be underweight, so maybe I have 40% have Kevin Harvick, something like that, instead of 50, 55, 60%. And then I'm banking more on lineups where these guys, somebody like a Joey Logano or somebody like a Kyle Larson, who's a lot cheaper, allows you to get a lineup where maybe you're playing a bunch of these mid-tier guys and then somebody like an Austin Dillon. I will say with Kevin Harvick, I think Austin Dillon and Kevin Harvick will be kind of contrarian because, if people are playing Kevin Harvick, they're going to want to be looking at some of these cheaper guys, Paul Menard, William Byron, Bubba Wallace, Casey Kane. So I think a Harvick and Dillon or a Harvick and Menard will be a little more contrarian than a Harvick and a William Byron, for example. So if you are playing Harvick, I do like pairing him up with Austin Dillon or Paul Menard. Same with Kyle Busch, obviously, and even more so, I like paying up for somebody like Austin Dillon if you're playing Kyle Busch. You could also pay up for, relative to Blaney or Almirola, you could pay up for Jimmy Johnson, that type of strategy there. So there is some things we can do strategy-wise to get a little contrarian that still gives us plenty of upside. I mean, if something happens and Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick finish 5th and 6th or, 6th and 8th or whatever it is, they're not going to end up in the winning lineup, probably, not without plenty of dominator points. So it sets up to be an interesting weekend. I think I'll be underweight on Kyle Busch. I think maybe I'll get close to 50% with Harvick, maybe 40%, somewhere in that ballpark. And then I just like builds where you get like, a Larson, a Boyer, maybe you get like an Almirola. Like we can just piece together, some of these pricing here, and a Johnson. You get 4 of those drivers, you're still left with $13,400, which is enough to get a couple 6K drivers in, right? So 6 to 7K drivers in, which you've got right there. So you can piece together lineups that don't even need Harvick and Kyle Busch, and that actually could give you more upside, right? Because if you're instead dropping from Paul Menard and Austin Dillon to Bubba and Casey Kane, you're probably sacrificing a lot of EV there. You're sacrificing 10 points, something like that, ballpark, at least 10 points, right? So 42, 42, 53, 49, 51. So ballpark, an average of about 10 points between these guys to these guys. And then are you really gaining 10 points by going from somebody like Kyle Busch to Clint Boyer? Well, that doesn't really show it. Harvick to Clint Boyer, not really. So I think you can get lineups where you don't even have Kyle Busch or Kevin Harvick. So I will definitely have lineups without both of those guys, especially if it ends up being like, somebody like Hamlin or Suarez or Keselowski or Truex ends up picking some dominator points and ends up finishing towards the front. That's where I think you can definitely get underweight on both of these guys. So, really interesting weekend. Those are kind of my thoughts on this whole slate. Like I said, I'm basically fading everybody between Newman and Timmy Hill. Not sure what I'm going to do with exposures to these guys. I definitely won't have any Jamie McMurray. Probably won't have any Chase Elliott. May have a sprinkle of Kurt Busch. May have some Martin Truex Jr. May have a tiny sprinkle of Eric Jones. Not really sure. May have a bit of Keselowski. May have a bit of Hamlin. And may have a bit of Suarez. But I really just like building lineups from the back here as my preferred strategy this weekend. So I'm playing it mostly like a restrictor plate race. Picking guys from the back, leveraging ownership percentages, and sprinkling in a little bit of the drivers from the front. So that I like. So kind of like I would with a restrictor plate race, maybe 1 or 2 drivers inside the top 20 in a lineup, something like that. Definitely can do 0 top 20 lineup type things or top 27s. You know, just pick all your drivers from back here. Those are certainly viable constructions as well, picking all your drivers from 28th or back. Let's quickly see if I didn't cover any questions here. How close were your lineup construction Beto plate race? Pretty similar. Bubba or Kane talked about that. It's literally a coin flip. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other on either of those two. Stewart Haas Racing smash this week? Not really sure. You know, I mean, there's a lot of ways this could go. And I think, you know, certainly it's possible, but what about somebody like, you know, Paul Menard and paired up with maybe a Joey Logano, something like that, you know, a little more of the Penske side of things. That's certainly possible. They didn't look as fast as SHR, but, you know, anything can happen in these races. And Pocono definitely is a track where strategy can come into play, and you can have a little bit of some surprises going on here. So then you've obviously got, you know, Kyle Busch in contention, some of the drivers up here. So it's not guaranteed to be a Stewart Haas Racing Smash week, but I definitely think that's a route a lot of people will go. Talked about the DNF rate. Does Larson go overlooked with Harvick and Kyle Busch back in the pack as well? I'm not so sure. You know, I wrote up Kyle Larson as a good play for GPPs. I think if people are getting away from one or the other of Kyle Busch and or Kevin Harvick, the next person they're going to be looking at is Kyle Larson. So I think the person that goes most overlooked probably is Joey Logano, and then obviously Jimmy Johnson. I think the ownership percentages reflect that. That's the way I feel about it. So I like going extra overweight on these guys and going underweight on maybe these two guys right here. So, you know, I wouldn't probably go crazy on Logano, but I think he could definitely pull off a top 5 and even has a chance to win. Like, let's look at Joey Logano's sim scores. Joey Logano, upside of 7. If we remove DNF, same thing. So it's a low DNF, or, you know, there is some DNFs here, but upside of 7. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that he's starting so far back that it's pulling in some worse drivers. You know, Eric Almirola from 2018, well, maybe around Joey Logano there, but you know, pulling in some other drivers that maybe aren't quite where I would compare to Joey Logano. So, you know, I think if we look at the top several comps here, you know, this is top 11 comps right there. You see, of those top 11, 1, 9, 1, 8, you know, 4. So 4 of the top 11 comps right there have top 9 finishes, which would be fantastic for Logano. That would give him 44 minus 9 is 35 plus 21, 56 points. That would, you know, 56 points right on the borderline of being in the winning lineup there. So, you know, let's do 56 divided by 9,700 times 1,000. It'd be 5.8x value almost. So, yeah, I mean, I think Joey Logano certainly is a driver I'd like to go a little more overweight on. Same with Jimmy Johnson. We saw Jimmy Johnson had like maybe an upside of 12, but again, we were comparing him to some worse drivers that really shouldn't be compared to. I'm much more lean towards the model here. So, you know, Jimmy Johnson projects really nicely. Projects the same as Ryan Blaney, projects the same as Larson and Clint Boyer, and even more than Logano. And he's only the you know, middle tier of this pack in terms of price. So, yeah, I think that's kind of how I'm just going to play it this weekend. Play it like mostly like a restrictor plate race. You can leave salary on the table. I wouldn't leave a ton. I think I set, when I was doing, you know, fiddling around with the optimizer, I think I set like 48,000 something as my minimum. But so I'm not going to drop below like 48,000 used. But I think you can leave over $1,000 on the table in some lineups if you wanted to. So that's another way to be a little contrarian, I guess. I don't think as many people are going to do that. I definitely think some people will, but not as many. And that's really my thoughts, I guess, on this weekend's slate. So I'm going to go ahead and try to... Oh, one other question. How much Hamlin is too much Hamlin? I think 20% is probably right around too much Hamlin. You know, I think this ownership percentage projection here for Hamlin, I would definitely be underweight. I just think there's so much chance for all these guys to come forward. There's no guarantee Denny Hamlin leads the opening laps. There's going to be a lot of strategy. And, you know, he definitely projects to fall a little bit in the finishing standings there. So I think 20% is probably too much Hamlin. But that's just my opinion. I think other people will feel differently. So That's going to do it for RotoViz Live. Very short show, but that's okay. Shorter the better sometimes because we don't want to overcomplicate this slate. So good luck, everyone, this weekend. Pretty chalky week, so kind of not a super fun slate to play. I think if, there's a winning lineup, it's probably going to be split tons of ways, tons and tons and tons of ways, most likely. So I might even do a strategy where I enter like only 50 lineups 3 times each, something like that. We'll see. But all right, good luck this weekend, and I'll see you guys next weekend as well. Take care.